order. And I'd like to welcome our witnesses today to this session to talk about the role of the departmental chief scientific advisors, particularly in the run-up to the spending review and the role of science advice in government. We as a committee have a role in ensuring that government policies and decision-making are based on solid scientific evidence and advice. And so we're very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today as chief scientific advisors or representatives from the Departments for Science, Innovation and Technology, Health and the Ministry of Defence. So I think I'm going to start with a sort of opening question to each of you, each department in turn. And I'll start with Professor Chris Johnson as the representative of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Because chief scientific advisors, their roles, I mean, it's a fantastic title. I would love to have it someday myself. I thought a bid for a job, by the way, but I just think chief scientific advisor sounds fantastic. Sounds great. But not everybody, certainly not the public, may understand what you do, what your role is within government, and how you work with everybody else who's in our departments and ministries and secretaries of states, etc. So I shall ask you, we don't have a lot of time, so if possible, try to be brief. But I'd like to know from each of you, firstly, start by introducing yourself briefly, and then what is the structure of your team or teams? So how many people are there, and who do they report into in that department? What are the benefits that you see a chief scientific advisor bringing to your department? Do you have a specific example of where you've made a difference, either to the delivery of a public service, or to a spending decision, or to the delivery of some other benefit for the British people? So, three: structure of your team and teams, what the role of the CSA and the benefits they bring, in a specific example. And can I start with you, Professor Johnson?
First of all, I was going to offer a job swap if you'd like to have my title for a few days. That'd be really
I may take you up on that sometime.
That would be great. Okay, so first of all, the structure of the team. So the Chief Scientific Advisor is a relatively new appointment within DSIT. Although the department has been going for almost 2 years, I've only been in post for 7 months.
Right.
But before that, there was the National Technology Advisor, Dave Smith, who I report to, and then also Dame Angela, who you'll be speaking to later on, the government's chief scientist. So being within the Department for Science, the science organisation is slightly different to other departments, because we not only have science advice going into policy areas such as the digital centre of government or AI, but we also, and I also, have a care for the UK's research environment, both commercial, public sector research establishments and universities. And so, although we have a relatively small team, we don't have a large direct budget as other departments might do, we have a significant say in the way in which we fund UK research on the whole. So the 13 billion that goes to DSIT, of that 6 billion funds UKRI and approximately 3 billion into Horizon Europe. And so my role is on providing an interface into those programs. And I think that's a fantastic strength of UK research, because it means that government does not get involved directly in the decisions of exploratory research. That's done through these other agencies. Is that sufficient just to begin on the first question?
Did you have a specific example?
Oh, a specific example of benefits. Well, obviously DSIT has multiple roles. Part of the role is in looking after the UK research environment, and I've worked really hard to build up relationships between the departments and UKRI and the research councils and public sector research establishments. But I think the thing I'm most proud of in terms of the first few months is working on the recovery from CrowdStrike, because the other part of our role is the digital centre of government and machine learning. And so one of the things that was observed is that CrowdStrike initially looked like it might have been a cyber incident with so many companies affected, but in fact it was related to a patch of a piece of protective software. And that raised questions that sat between many different departments of government, in the sense that DCIT, looking at how we deliver the digital economy, is involved, even though it's not necessarily a cyber incident. So we were looking at things like, here is a piece of software that most people that use it didn't even know that they had it in their system, because it was buried from them. They'd not bought it, they bought a product in which it was embedded. And if we set up a too rigorous or too narrow a contingency response, and the cyber teams say, well, it's not cyber, then we've got a clear problem. And in what's, I think, probably interesting for the committee is that there have been examples in the past where malware has been disguised to look like it's a bug. So you don't think it's a cyber attack, but it is actually a bug. And so this distinction between routine software error or a malicious attack is very blurred. And so DCIT, with the intelligence agencies, the National Cyber Security Centre and Cabinet Office, have worked to provide a more harmonised approach so that we don't automatically make a decision as to whether it's cyber or whether it's another form of response. So I actually believe in the 6 months we're in a much stronger place, a much more flexible place to respond in an integrated way.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Now, Dr. Joad and Professor Mehta, you're doing a job share for the Department for the Ministry of Defence. So who you would like to respond to the question?
I'll respond to this one, and then Nick will come into some later ones.
Later ones, okay.
Yes, just some background on that. We are in the process of recruiting a new CSA for MOD. So in the meantime, I do 2 days a week as a senior strategic scientist covering 50% of the role. Usually, we would have somebody 4 days a week, 80% seconded. We're in the process right at the moment of rolling back in the CSA nuclear role into the general CSA role, which is a considerable change. We had to split that out because of a nationality issue's the wrong word, but a nationality conflict perhaps with a previous CSA. So that's an interesting development. We'll be rolling those roles back in. The CSA within MOD has various different functions. We advise the Minister on science and technology issues, innovation as well. We also look at approvals and advice in terms of procurement and things like this. We also manage the portfolio budget, the CSA core budget, which is about 500 million set at 15%, or it is about 15%, not set at, of the total MOD R&D investment. I have about 140 people in defence science and technology who fulfill various roles, including policy work, commissioning, and other aspects. We also have a network of about 60 scientists and engineers, the SIADs, scientific advisors, who are dispersed through the MOD structure. So into frontline commands, through head office, strategic command, and DE&S, so defence equipment and support, which is the defence procurement arm. I would stress we're in a period of change within defence. We are undergoing a process known as defence reform, where we are working working how to structure our scientific advice and innovation through that new structure that MOD will put in place quite shortly. We also have the Strategic Defence Review that has yet to give us full readout. So we're in a period of some flux where we're working things out about how best to do that. And that was the first example I was going to give you of how the CSA role has brought benefit. So I spent quite a lot of my time since coming into this role on the 1st of October engaging with that organisational change and working sure that science, technology and innovation are well represented in terms of how we thread that through in terms of organisational change. 2 other examples, if I may, I was going to give you was the Salisbury, the Novichok instance in Salisbury. The ChemBio capability is something that we steward within MOD, and the CSA stewards that capability. So most of the time, unfortunately, we do not need that capability, but sometimes we need it very, very desperately. And so we steward having that capability within country, but also within theatre for our troops, should we need it. And the third I was going to give an example was the Morpheus procurement, which actually the CSA and the Defence Science and Expert Committee stood down that procurement because it was not going to deliver what was required, and that was based on science and technology advice. So that stopped a piece of expenditure which would not have given us the capability that we needed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mather. And Professor Chappell, you're representing the Department for Health and Social Care. I just want to mention here that the Department for Health and Social Care has a £2 billion science spend. The Ministry of Defence has £1.8 billion. So, Professor Chappell.
Thank you very much. I'm seconded into government at 80%, similar to Ministry of Defence, as the Chief Scientific Advisor for DHSC. And as you've heard, and similar to the other departments, I'm there to give science advice to ministers, very much in concert with the Chief Medical Officer, who I report into, both within the department, but also a crucial role across government. So the network of CSAs has got a fantastic role, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that from the government CSA in the next session. With that, as you say, comes responsibility for the R&D spend. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Health and Care Research, which was set up in 2006 under a previous Labour government by Dame Sally Davis, and has gone from strength to strength, and is the main mechanism by which we execute our research and delivery. And the third role is as Director General. I'm responsible for 3 directorates: Science, Research and Evidence, which is one of their roles is really to administer the funds through the NHR. The second is the Chief Analyst Directorate, Chris Mullin, who's our Chief Analyst and our Chief Economist. And the third is our Chief Data Officer, Lucy Vickers, who again works with all the other Chief Data Officers across government. The headcount for those 3 teams is 370. I work 20% as a professor of obstetrics. I'm a clinical trialist. I do trials in pregnancy, and I'm a consultant obstetrician in the NHS, still working frontline for both of those. How do I think we make a difference? So in the last 8 months or so, NHR has really looked at how we make a difference through 4 routes: impact, innovation, investment, and inclusion. So some examples of impact, because if I can't show examples of impact, then our R&D hasn't achieved what I think that it should be doing. And some examples I would choose is, for example, providing the evidence for a shift for virtual wards, so shifting care from hospital to home. That was done through a randomised controlled trial, which showed equivalent clinical outcomes, better patient satisfaction and cost savings. Supporting innovation, which we see as a crucial part of our role, such as the Brainomics AI for stroke imaging, which reduces the time from door to needle for those who need interventional treatment for stroke. And also providing evidence for the diabetes prevention programme. Those 3 examples I've chosen mirror the 3 reform shifts that we're seeking to do in our health and growth mission. And I've chosen them on purpose because NIHR already has a track record. But actually the 4th one is supporting the life sciences industry through a whole range of partnerships, which we see as a crucial part of our work. But our innovation is across what we do. Our investment, we've reported our return on investment as £13.60 for every pound invested in health research. And inclusion, we really welcome what this government has been saying and doing on an inclusion approach, because we believe that if research is going to have an impact on health outcomes, it can only tackle those inequalities by ensuring that we make research available to all of our population.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chappell, and thank you all of you, because I think we all have a better idea of what the role of a Chief Scientific Advisor is. I have another, just a couple of questions for each of you in turn before I hand over to the rest of the committee. And I have to say, I was somewhat surprised to read the government guidance, previous government guidance, or previously given guidance, describing the role of departmental CSA as a licensed dissident. I think, as a science champion, I think science should be part of the infrastructure, the establishment, the system, and not on the outside sort of looking in, which is to a certain extent what a dissident implies. So I just would like each of you in turn or each of the representatives in turn, just to say, are you a dissident? What does that mean to you? And can you, as part of that, can you see ministers when and as often as you judge necessary. And I'm sorry, this is a specific question. When was the last time you saw one of your ministers? And so I'll start again with Professor Johnson.
Yeah, okay. I feel slightly uncomfortable about that licensed dissident quote. I've seen it many times, and I think there's a tension in terms of how I view research and science in the UK, and part of it is the need to collaborate and cooperate to optimise finite resources. But there was a report published by the European Commission last year which had the title something like, I'm going to get it wrong, but approximately combine, focus, align. And I just thought that's totally the wrong thing, because I mean, for me, the thing that is a key strength of science and engineering in the UK is the diversity of views and the ability to disagree, but at the same time to be collegiate and collaborative. And our strength really comes from our ability to combine that diversity and not throw the toys out of the pram when we're wrong. Yeah. And that's been my watchword when I've been in the department. Specifically, I was in a meeting with Minister Vallance last Friday, so what's that, 4 days? And we were discussing how we can maximise the benefit of public sector research establishments in the UK, which I think is a fantastic opportunity for growth and development, aligning with both industry and our traditional strengths in universities. I'll give you a very specific example that I really like, which is that ARIA, which is this kind of blue skies research think tank, when the CEO gave the introduction to its recent achievements, he was talking a lot about the challenge to thinking. And then what I was really surprised about was the strength of the delivery coming through that are often going through more traditional sources like UKRI or these public sector research establishments. And I think that as a chief scientific advisor, encouraging that challenging thought, but then really the traditional approach to science and engineering, which has been our strength and is based on diversity and collaboration, you know, those are the things that are in my soul about this job and why I did it in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So who's going to answer on behalf of the Ministry of Defence?
I will, again. So I think language is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Dissident is what we often look at as a critical friend, more in MOD, in terms of the way that but the challenge function is really, really important. And I think one of the strengths of the CSA roles is that we are people who are seconded in for a period of time. We are not career civil servants, and we provide independent challenge and a view from the outside and networks from the outside as well. So there certainly have been times that we have to give uncomfortable advice, but I hope that it's always been given in a friendly way rather than a dissident type of way. But the challenge role is absolutely vital. And we can badge it in whichever way you like, but it is important to be able to ask those difficult questions and tell those difficult truths sometimes. You had another question, I think, about the last time I saw a minister.
Can you see ministers when you want, and when is the last time you saw
To
one
be
of your
fair,
ministers?
I've only been in this role since the 1st of October. I have not asked to see a minister yet, nor have I seen a minister. So I think that is a very factual answer to your question.
Thank you. We appreciate facts here. Thank you. Professor Chappell.
Thank you. I think Tamsin's put it very elegantly, and I think that reflects very much my role. I see our role as being science into policy and policy into science. And so that role of understanding how we can present science as informing policy, practice and guidelines across the health and care system is a really crucial one. And that's partly by reaching ministers, but it's also by reaching policymakers and understanding how we present that in an accessible way. We are definitely encouraged to challenge, particularly by the current set of ministers. One of the difficult things is how do we all deal with uncertainty and how do we represent that uncertainty? So, for example, is it that we don't have the evidence, in which case we should be open about that, or is it that we have the evidence but we're not sure how to implement it? So if you think about the COVID pandemic, when presenting that uncertainty was really challenging for everyone, and how we attempted to do that through a sort of evidence-informed way, I think that's a good example of what we're trying to do, not just for the pandemic, but across all of our areas. I see our ministers very regularly, both our Secretary of State, but also the Minister for my portfolio, which is Baroness Merrin. That might be in one-to-one meetings where for accountability. It might be where I am an accompanying civil servant for external meetings, and it might be on visits. There is very strong working relationships, both between the Chief Medical Officer, who is acting as our Permanent Secretary at the moment, and our ministerial team. And I welcome that open dialogue. In addition, if any of the other ministers, we often feed into briefings or meetings where research and science and the evidence base, or from my role in charge of the analysts and the data team, that might be relevant. So for us, it's a very constructive relationship at the moment.
And did you see your minister more recently than Friday?
What have I been up to? What day of the week is it? It's Tuesday. I saw Secretary of State last week, and I saw Minister Merrin last week, earlier in the week, because Fridays they're often out and about.
Very good. Right. Thank you very much for those answers. I think you've helped us understand your role. And now I'm going to ask Adam to carry on.
Over here this week.
Sorry, yes.
Normally I sit over the other side. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming down today. So, the Government Office for Science Guidance suggests that a departmental R&D strategy forms the basis of research funding plans broadly. Question to each of you. Is there an overarching strategy that forms the basis of your department's R&D spending, and then within that, how can we ensure that big spending departments like yours, with many arm's length bodies, ensure that R&D spending has a strategic focus? Maybe we'll start with Professor Johnson.
When I first arrived, we didn't have a science plan, and that was the first thing that was on my job description to do. And we had it approved by Exec Committee last Thursday, so that's all going ahead. But I think what the plan documents is another aspect to the job that hasn't been covered so far, which is like a care and concern for the science profession in the civil service. Because, I mean, you'll obviously know that there is a need to attract and retain scientists and engineers, and also often the benefits that you gain from working in the civil service are not financial. So there is a clear public sector, public service concern to people, especially within DSIT, where we rely on increasingly large numbers of people in areas like machine learning. And so in my case, I could talk about the work that we do with UKRI, for instance, in the delivery of the global science picture, but I've already referred to that. So I'd rather talk to you just now about the aspects of the science plan that deal with the development of skills, the retention of staff. And I've taken the position when I came into the department to really build on what was already there. So there was already a staff group called TEX, which had run a series of talks and so on. I think it's also really important to say that DSIT, like many other departments in the civil service, is distributed throughout the UK now. Yeah. And I've been making it my duty to go and visit as many of the sites as I can, and also make sure that any development that we offer is open to them as well, as far as the opportunities allow. I'm about to embark on a skills audit, in the sense that we have to look at in more detail at what the mapping of scientific and engineering skills presently is, and then start future casting, for example, looking at the industrial strategy and our responsibilities within that. But we also have to be able to support new initiatives like Humphrey, for instance, the AI tools and digital wallets and so on. So it's a fantastic time to be innovating in government in DSIT, and the science plan has to really adapt both to the national aspects of the industrial strategy and the internal commitments to deliver to the public a new experience in interacting with government.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Before we move on to colleagues from the MOD, maybe you've talked extensively about the R&D strategy that you're currently developing. I mean, to what extent is that going to define DSIT spending specifically?
Well, it will influence the spending, especially in the staffing area. But the overall budget allocation, because we are the Department for Science, is done in negotiation with Treasury, and then the Secretary of State. There's a pipeline, a formal process which we follow in consultation with UKRI and the arms length bodies who actually deliver the science and engineering. As I said at the start, things like the Haldane principle and so on are there to protect curiosity-driven research. So it's slightly awkward in my position in that I can inform, but I don't want to be too interventionist in terms of dictating, if you like, a government's view or a civil service view of what research should be done. That's
perfect, thank
great.
you. MOD colleagues.
Oh yeah, if I could pick that up. We do have a science and technology strategy which we published about 4 years ago now. We will be updating that in the light of the Defence Review and also the changing technology climate. It's probably worth just picking up your point about how do we ensure that we are aligned with our S&T strategy. We actually run our S&T investment using some various portfolio management techniques, which we've done for quite a long time actually. And we were probably one of the first people in government to pick up that approach. What we actually do with that is we capture requirements from across the whole of the MOD, and that's coming back to Tamsin's point about we have, half of my staff are actually embedded out with the users of S&T, and we use them to actually capture what problems or things that they actually want from our S&T investment, and they're capturing things called problem books. And then the problem books and the S&T strategy we then pull together, and we then construct a portfolio of investment, which typically lasts about 4 years, 5 years sometimes, depends on the government funding cycles and that sort of thing. So we are in the process, we are just about to go into the next phase of changing that in the light of what comes next. That portfolio is structured so it's about half £500 million a year. It's then structured into about 30 different programmes, which are generally of two types. So either they are programmes which are aimed at specifically solving users' problems. So there might be one aimed at what's the top 5 or 10 problems the Navy needs sorting out. Or they're actually technology-driven programmes which are really about pulling through low maturity technologies into the mod system. So that's how the portfolio sort of looks. That's then commissioned by my organisation and into DSTL. So DSTL is the MOD's in-house research organisation. Yeah. They then actually put half of that stuff out into industry and academia as well, and they deliver that. So the trick we're trying to pull off with our investment is actually addressing as many of our users' requirements while at the same time meeting the strategy. And actually there's a whole lot of government requirements in there, things to do with sort of, prosperity and, some regional policy and that sort of stuff. So that's part of, how we pull all of that together and build the portfolio to do that.
Great. And just before I move on to Professor Chappell, what role do you two play within your department's R&D spending decisions?
So the CSA is sort of responsible for that. The money's delegated down to them. Yeah. I actually look after the portfolio. So, I've got a set of things I have to deliver around the portfolio. Part of that's probably worth saying as well, that the portfolio itself is quite dependent on its engagement internationally and also with other government departments, because we're trying to pull that classic trick off of we only want to invest in things that we have to do, not stuff we can get from somewhere else. So those are the sort of the broad roles.
Great, thank you, Dr. Joad. And then Professor Chappell, if we go back to that strategy question.
So the strategy is defined in the Best Research for Best Health Next chapter, which was the strategy document that my predecessor Chris Whitty and Louise Wood published in July 2021, which, with my knowledge, which was the month before I started. It turned out to be extremely prescient, as not surprisingly. So what it defined is 6 core work streams. We fund programmatic research, we fund infrastructure, including research delivery, partnering with patients, which we see as crucial underpinning, capacity building for our researchers across the country, collaborating with funders, industry and charities. And our 6th core work stream is our global health research using ODA funding. And the other aspect of this was 7 strategic focuses. And as I say, because of how they were positioned, they turned out to be the real health needs of now, and which is why they've been so relevant. So learning from the COVID pandemic, building capacity in prevention health and public health and social care research, which we've seen as real areas of development, improving the lives of people with multiple long-term conditions, which is an area that Dr. Gardner's been involved in, thinking about underserved regions and using research as a tool to tackle inequalities, thinking about research inclusion, which I've touched on, strengthening careers, and actually in the health and care workforce at the moment, that's particularly relevant. And the last one is working with life sciences industry. So when I came into post, it was clear that people didn't want upheaval for the sake of it, and that strategy document was so powerful. We just got on with delivery, because it's easy to write strategy documents. It's actually what you do with them that counts. With the new government, we chose to use that as a framework, but to pivot to the health and the growth missions. And so our Spending Review 1, our SR1 settlement in October, was very much put against the pillars of the and the goals of the SR1. So looking at an NHS which is there when people need it, so very much that timely access point, fewer lives lost to the big killers, and a fairer Britain where everyone lives well for longer, so that healthy life expectancy, coupled with how we support the growth mission, so driving economic growth in a whole number of ways. And that is also how we put what we back in September put for SR2.
And your role within the spending decisions personally?
So I'm responsible for the R&D return to Treasury. I have sight of all of the R&D spend across the HSC, including in other areas. But as we've heard, the huge bulk of it is through NIHR with delegations from Treasury.
Thank you.
Can I just ask there, so the Department for Health and Social Care, is a large spender on innovation and research. There is well-known barriers to driving innovation through the NHS. We do not take up new innovative drugs and medtech, etc., as quickly as other countries. Can I just ask, what proportion of the spend drives actual sort of innovation in the NHS, and are you working to address those barriers?
Yeah. So the R&D spend has to be Frascati compliant by the Frascati manual, which is the OECD manual that determines it's across many countries, and all of us who spend R&D are very used to assessing spend against what is in that. So that tells us what is eligible under the R&D banner and what is not. So our role is to fund the R&D that will drive that innovation, provide the evidence for it, and then to work with system partners such as MHRA, a Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, and NICE, who are the ones who actually do the approvals, and then also to think about how we help drive that adoption, which we're doing in a number of ways through the R&D spend. So the actual, we want to present this particularly to partners in the life sciences as being a pipeline or a translational circle that actually helps to drive that innovation adoption. And so we, through our R&D spend, do that in a number of ways. We have an I4I programme, Invention for Innovation, where we fund directly, particularly into small and medium enterprises, SMEs, to develop their products. And then also work on what we might call the implementation research barriers. So if you've got a product but it's not being adopted, why? And how would we do R&D that better understood those barriers? You then have the responsibility for the spend by NHS England on that scale up. And again, I work very closely with Vinda Wacker, who's the Director of Transformation in NHS England, who heads up the Innovation, Research and Life Sciences Directorate, to actually see, and with my colleagues such as in DHSC, such as the Director for MedTech, David Lawson, to say what mechanisms, such as having a rules-based pathway, would really address what you're doing.
See, could I come in for a second just to support what you're saying? I think one of the things that the committee might be really interested in is that with the advent of the missions, CSAs have been appointed across government departments, and so I work with Lucy on the healthcare mission. I'm a software engineer, data scientist by background, and part of the reason that Go Science and Dame Angela have done that is to put new ways of thinking and innovation into these complex situations. And so I always remember the first day that I was asked to look at the healthcare mission. One of the outcomes was to endeavour to eliminate the use of ambulances when beds are blocked. And as a software engineer, I'd never looked at that, and I never would have thought that would have been within my field of interest. So I think it's really important to understand that the CSA's value collectively is greater than our individual departments. So although the questions have been in individual departments, we work very much as a team. Another example would be Tamsin Sorry.
Thank you, everybody. Last couple of questions from me before we move on. And the first one, just a very blunt yes-no answer, if you could. Summarising everything that we have just been through, in your respective departments, is science advice informing the budgets?
Yes.
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 Excellent.
Good stuff. And final question, a little more open than the previous one. Final one from me. Moving forward to talking about the spending review as we move forward into the next few months, what discussions have you had in your departments about how R&D spend is going to function within the sort of context of the spending review?
Yeah, I've been involved in all of the initial discussions. As I mentioned before, the process is well defined, and we do a certain amount of scenario planning, as you would expect.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think just picking up on Chris's point, it's quite a well-defined process and department. We've been very engaged in putting together sort of, proposals and bids into that process. It's probably also worth saying that there's been quite a lot of work has gone into looking at the spending review, engagement with other government departments. So we have a very close relationship with our intelligence colleagues and our national security colleagues. And actually, there's joint things are being written to go into that process.
I'll do that.
I'd echo what Nick said. I mean, so I think our SR within the department is very closely aligned to our sort of health-focused, our health and growth mission, because that's been the very clear steer. But that inevitably means, and through GCSA convened meetings, looking at how we all get cross-linkage so that it really is mission-led government. But there are a number of other strategies. So I'd name the AI Action Plan, the Life Sciences Vision, the 10-year plan, which is starting to look at a health and care system fit for the future, CBR, so chemical, biological, radiological, so biosecurity, which is a very cross-government endeavour, but also how we work with UKRI, because the greatest, the best outcomes and the best impact will happen when, for example, our closest partners are the Medical Research Council, but also Innovate UK, where we see that join up so that we don't have valleys of death for science funding. We have the opposite. We have bridges, we have opportunities for everyone across science and research to deliver.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much for those answers. I think they're very illuminating. I'm now going to ask Alison to take us forward.
Thank you very much. I'll start with a sort of short one to you all. Given the constrained public finances that we have, what trade-offs do you expect as in the upcoming spending reviews? Yes, start.
First, yeah, well, I think everybody has, I think, concerns that they focus on, and obviously also opportunities, and it's kind of not being overwhelmed by the former so that you obscure the latter. So I'll talk first of all about a concern that I have that we're working on actively, and secondly about an opportunity that I see coming through as something totally new. So the concern I have is that with limited resources, how do we look to the next generation of scientists and engineers and make sure that we have sufficient capability that is, at least in some approximation, appropriate for where we want to be in 5 or 10 years? And if we leave it to pure chance or the choice of the students, bluntly, that may not align with where we need to be. And how we can manage a national dialogue about the skills that we need, I think, is the appropriate way forward. It's not up to me as Chief Scientific Advisor to say this is how it should be, but we do need to be more upfront about the kind of skill set that we need going forward, and at least as a minimum make sure that we have enough telecoms engineers to implement successor to 6G. That's the kind of thing that concerns me. But I'd also talk about an opportunity. So last week I was with Minister Vallance at the Royal Academy of Engineering, and they've started a scheme where venture capitalists from UK companies can embed themselves and have a course about deep tech, in the idea that you get people with financial skills being introduced to the problems of the next generation of technology. And I noticed that the founders of DeepSeek, that's all over the newspapers this morning, come out of a venture capital company. So I think the spending review is constrained, but that doesn't mean that as a country we should be constrained. We should look to what is the leading practices in other countries for innovation and really move with it. And I think when a learned society like the Royal Academy of Engineering does this, it's a fantastic and positive sign for the country.
Concerns and opportunities, I quite like that. Over to yourselves. I don't know who we
I'll answer this one. So yeah, concerns and opportunities. Should we start with the concerns? We have various things we need to do as defence. We've talked about some of them in terms of keeping the homeland safe, and we also have continuing operational requirements that we have to answer. So we have a list of what we call national sovereign capabilities, and some of those have been underfunded over a period of time, and some of the infrastructure is creaking. So some of the things that keep me awake at night in terms of the constrained budget are things like that, if I'm honest. I think with the constrained budget, we risk losing some resource for that forward look as well, to keeping us at the forefront of being a globally mighty military force, and I do, I'm concerned about technologies in other nations getting ahead of us. And in order to do that, we need to keep our eye to the future. We need to keep our eye to innovation. We need to keep our eye on things like quantum technologies. And I very much hope we will be the first military that will deploy quantum for position, navigation and timing. We should be able to, but this is, of course, dependent on resources. Direct energy weapons as well are another thing that we're very close to be able to. And those things would not have happened without my predecessors decades in the past looking forward and seeing these things on the horizon. And I think as resources get constrained, I worry that we won't be stocking the shelf of innovation to keep us competitive in the future. I also worry about our engagement with the industrial ecosystem, and I think with the growth agenda it's incredibly important. So the SMEs, for example, and our ability to be able to put contracts out and to keep that ecosystem ticking along. The opportunities, I've promised some, I think a little bit, we need to focus on what we need to do as defence, and we can work better with other departments across government. We can work better with universities, and we can work better with industry to outsource some of the things that might be better done there, and this is an opportunity for that.
Thank you. And Professor Chappell.
Thank you. So I think there are difficult trade-offs, particularly in health and care, but I think we have to repeatedly show how R&D investment pays off. And we have to do that by demonstrating the impact. And that's why the return on investment analysis piece of work we did was so helpful to making our case. So as somebody who works in the NHS myself, I feel very strongly that we can't just carry on doing what we've always done. We've got to improve, innovate, evolve our health and care system, and R&D is the driver to do that. So, for example, everyone is familiar with the sort of R&D driving new interventions, but actually we should be also asking what can we stop, which sometimes, and we've done some sort of evidence collections on. For example, if you have a hip replacement, you can safely stop routine follow-up from 1 year to 10 years because it doesn't add value. So identifying where we can do, as a different example, where we can do replacement pathways rather than just additive pathways. It's very easy to think of health and care as layering one thing on another, but actually we've got huge opportunities if you look at AI in doing replacement pathways. And that's R&D where we can really show our value. If you look at the switch from treatment to prevention, that should be powered by evidence. The other aspect of this is where R&D supports growth within health and care. So, for example, supporting the industry investment into clinical trials, thinking about how do we produce a healthy workforce? How do we tackle the issues around productivity, both within health and care itself, but also addressing some of the big challenges, whether it's in musculoskeletal disease or mental health, where we improve the productivity of the country. And then also areas like health security, whereby investing in R&D that helps us, including with MOD colleagues, to look at health security, we can drive that. The budget for DHSC is around 200 billion. So whilst the DHSC R&D budget is seen as one of the most generous ones in government, if you look at it as a proportion of our total spend, you will see that I think it's absolutely essential and that we continue to see that R&D investment to drive the improved outcomes for the future.
Thank you. And I think you may have hinted to some of your spending priorities. So my next question will be about your spending priorities in the upcoming spending review period. But in answering your question, and I will in all niceness explain that I previously worked with a DHSC funded project with NICE, and we're living on a year to year. We didn't know whether we were going to get the funding, and even 3-year projects, how they can just about to take off and then the funding is cut and something new comes along, and there's a bit of wastage in that. So in the next answer, I'd quite interested to know what you would want to continue to fund to make sure it really does get beyond that initial stage, and any new initiatives. So what are your spending priorities for the next spending review period? And I'll start with Professor Chappell this time.
Thank you. So I think it's a really crucial question for this committee. Because I think you very well illustrate the difficulties with on-off funding. So we feel, that we consider that it's a real strength of the UK government to do sustained, longer-term infrastructural funding that gives our amazing scientists and researchers some of that certainty. That doesn't mean we keep inefficient, ineffective research running. We have ways of terminating contracts, but actually that the funding towards our infrastructure is crucial, and that infrastructure includes our talent base. And actually I was at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, where the global CEOs really rate that. It is one of the reasons that we will attract inward investment into the UK, is for that investment into our infrastructure, and that is where we work very closely with UKRI. So there is both that foundational science. I think we should see it as insurance against emergencies, against shocks, against pandemic preparedness for biosecurity. Because if we switch that off, we just wouldn't have been able to do what we did in COVID and be the world leaders for therapeutics, for vaccines, and for other areas. I think we are still able to pivot to incoming government priorities, and as the R&D funding arm of DHSC, I see that as a crucial part of my role. So, for example, we have explicitly done that against both the missions in terms of the goals, but also against the shifts. So hospital to community, analogue to digital, treatment to prevention. So we run that sort of blend of sustained longer-term infrastructural funding with that ability to pivot.
Thank you. And over to Dr. Joad.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I pick a few examples out, I mean...
I'm afraid we're going to have to move on quite quickly,
yes,
so if you could just...
okay, well, things I need to pull
example.
through into service. Directed energy we talked about, quantum, we talked about hypersonic weapons. Those are all things that have come out of long-term research, over, sustained over probably a decade or 15 years. I need to finish those off and pull them through. And at the same time, as we picked up before, generation after the next, I've got to start filling the cookie jar with new stuff as well. So that's my challenge in terms of what I've got to sustain.
And briefly, Professor Johnson.
DCIT funds a large number of long-term commitments, including within the infrastructure for science and engineering in the country. So actually the room for manoeuvre is relatively or surprisingly small, but I think the main priority for DCIT is to maintain those commitments, but also have the space to innovate through ARIA, through the missions, and also through the 10-year commitment that we've also been instructed to develop for funding, which takes away that short-termism for long-term basic research, which I think is essential. It's that mix.
Final one, or do you want to move on?
Very quickly.
Really, really quick. I am going to ask this. What can this committee do to ensure that the spending review supports science? Very brief. What would you like us to do to support?
One word.
One word.
Yes.
Can I do 6? Call us back in 6 months.
That's great. I wouldn't add anything more to that. Show your support and interest. That's all what we need.
Champion the value of R&D.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answers. I'm now going to ask Emily to take us on to the next question.
I'm really conscious of time,
Yes.
Chair,
Okay.
so I'll try and ask these questions quite quickly. They're specifically around the MOD.
Right.
So obviously we have the defence, the Strategic Defence Review coming. What's been your role in that? What is the role of R&D in that? And how forward-looking, linking it with the Defence Futures work that's been done by the MOD, how forward-looking is it within that sort of R&D timeline and horizon in terms of those future threats and future opportunities?
Okay, so we wrote a piece to go into the Defence Review, and that was all about what things did we think that the MOD had to do, frankly, now to make best use of its opportunities in the technology space. We've talked about quite a lot of them already in that sort of area. So we've been very involved in that. We've given evidence to the reviewers in that sort of space. One thing that's certainly come out of that is getting that balance right between keeping things stocked up, long-term things, but also we are, the geostrategic complex situation is pretty bad. You guys know all of that. So there are some things that, frankly, we just need to get on and do. And one of the things coming out of that is how do we work much better with the diversity of our supply chain. So there's stuff in there to do with how do we do better scale up and better manufacturing of our R&D going into that, as well as all the other things we've talked about. So it's quite very, very involved in that sort of space.
Perfect. Well, that leads me really well on to the next question. So I'm part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme with the RAF. What's been really interesting to me is to see the co-location of so many industrial partners on each of these sites in terms of the development, and that's. But there are key supply chains like microchips that people don't even know are there. That I think Hawaii own 80%, 75% of the patents on the microchips for 5G enabled. Clearly, these are the sorts of things. How do you see the development of that strategic industry in the UK, and particularly around the security around the stuff that the MOD and our intelligence services are developing in terms of those interoperabilities?
Very quickly, a very specific mental thing, but I think Chris is ideally placed to actually talk about some of that, yeah. So, I think you are right. There's quite a lot of work goes on in the MOD worrying about the robustness of its supply chains. And it's not just in some of the technologies that you might imagine. So electronics is a classic one people talked about quite a lot, and AI and that sort of thing. But even things like there are some specialist chemicals in the CB world that, frankly, there's only one place you can get them. So MOD is actually looking at all of that process in terms of its supply chain. There's also something in there about deciding where do you get the biggest payback for your investment, because we are not going to onshore the world's global supply chains. That's just not going to happen. We actually have to be quite selective about where do we invest our money, and that is to do with things about what is the impact of lack of diversity in the supply chain and fragility. And there's quite a lot of people are looking at that in the MOD at the moment. Do we have the answer to that? Not yet, but that's what we're working on.
I just follow up that on a specific with the Ministry of Defence's CAMID cycle, the Concept Assessment Demonstration Manufacture In-Service and Disposal cycle for procurement, which doesn't have innovation in there. And how quickly can you draw through from low technology readiness to deployment? Is the procurement cycle of is it supportive of drawing through innovative, new, and potentially British-based providers?
So at the moment, there's a piece of work going on in the MOD called the Integrated Procurement Model, and that is actually looking at trying to address some of those issues about how do you pull things through quickly. And in particular, a lot of it is majoring on how you do spiral development or spiral acquisition. And so what we mean by that is rather than buying things in one go, how do you actually buy things and then do the technology insertion? The advantage of that is actually it really helps our supply chain, because the problem is if you've got a very spiky procurement of things, actually that's a very difficult business model for companies to deal with. So there's work going on in that space, and actually Chris, I'm sure, is really eager to jump in because there's loads.
Okay, Chris, quick, briefly.
I promise I'll be quick, but it's really important to see the CSAs as a network, and we support each other, because some of those questions about semiconductors are front and centre of what DSIT does, and we're really looking, and we work with MOD colleagues in that space. I'd also point the committee to some of the funding schemes within UKRI that are supply chain focused, and they're specifically about pull through. So an example would be both nuclear fission and nuclear fusion are supported by research grants where there's a kind of a nexus that goes from Harwell through Oxford all the way up to Cumbria, and they make a huge amount of sense to me to be able to do exactly what you're suggesting in terms of having the very best science leading into deployment in areas which have a really big impact on the economy or should do. And that's within UKRI funding.
Right. Okay.
Just to close that off with the MOD, two things. So do you think ministers properly understand some of those strategic risks in terms of supply chains, in terms of where you're getting materials and the opportunities? And secondly, in the Strategic Defence Review, are we going to see some of this absolutely laid out? I know you say you contributed, you suggested some stuff, but is there actually, does this form part of the Strategic Defence Review that will eventually be published?
Okay, I can't say exactly what's going to be in the Defence Review until it's been published because I haven't seen all of it. I think it does talk about quite extensively about the need to have an integrated set of capabilities, and part of that is actually integrating the contribution that industry make. So all of these things about changing our procurement models, changing the way we engage with them, actually being much more open with industry about these are our problems, how can you help us, because that's the way we get stuff back. Those have all been themes in there. In terms of your specific question, I'm afraid I don't know, but those are definitely the themes that have gone in.
Do you think ministers are aware of some of these?
Yes, I think, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Steve to ask a very important question. And though we're running out of time, so I think it's important that we spend some time on this so we don't have to finish exactly at 1:45. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a really interesting panel so far. I'm going to ask two questions together so that I can just pass them both onto you, and I'll start with Professor Chappell. The first is around what do you think are the capabilities? We talk about the UK being a science superpower. There's some debate about whether that's to what extent that is true, but obviously we want it to be true. What are the capabilities from skills to investment elsewhere that we need in this country to either get to or maintain our capability as a science superpower? And second, I want to just touch on sovereign capability. We slightly skirted around the topic there, but sovereign capability within your respective areas, where do we need to do more to develop sovereign capability so that we are successful as a nation in the future? Professor Chappell, I'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start, but actually this couldn't be more of a cross-cutting issue if we tried. And actually, whilst I can talk about skills and investment for the health and care research and for our wider workforce, the responsibility for skills and some of that investment will sit firmly with DSIT. So I think as CSAs, we've got responsibility for our sector, but we also very much look to DSIT for the overarching perspective. So from a DHSC perspective, NHR chooses to invest in equipping the health and care workforce with every person, whether it's in secondary care or in primary care or social care, social work, public health, nurses, midwives, allied health professionals. Anybody who is delivering health and care should feel that they can have should see how they have a path in research. As NHR has run a number of campaigns called Shape the Future, Your Path in Research, that really encourages everyone on the front line and in any aspect of health and care to be part of that. Not just the workforce, but actually, I would argue we should be doing a big pull from patients as well to be asking for participation. So as an example, NHR funds employers for the Research Delivery Network, the RDN, which is our funding of around 11,000 individuals in across all our hospital trusts and in primary care, and in some agile delivery teams to go out and deliver research. And that is a resource that is there not just for NHR studies, but for UKRI, charities, industry, so that it's seen on an international level is a highly enviable way. So rather than that short-termism of hiring and firing for each grant, you both have a much more efficient workforce, but you're also investing in your people. So if we look at recruitment and retention in health and care particularly, we know that those that are research active have got lower burnout, higher satisfaction. And then there are broader areas about investing in our science base, which we do, for example, particularly through our experimental medicine, our biomedical research centres, our health tech research centres, and much of that foundation investment, infrastructure investment that we touched on. Do you want me to go on to sovereign capabilities, or do you want to hear from colleagues first about skills and investment?
Do sovereign capabilities, no problem.
So sovereign capabilities, again, is a very, very shared area. And in fact, I could name sort of several that, again, is seen partly coordinated through the government CSA team, and Go Science is seen as a shared endeavour. So, for example, we could talk about high containment laboratories. We could talk about sovereign capabilities in AI. Both of those areas are very much cross-cutting. I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we seeking sovereign capabilities? What is it about that area? We've heard about other critical technologies such as quantum, engineering, biology, and are we going to be doing it all? Should we look at the UK's competitive advantage? And I think I really welcome the work by Go Science, which is choosing to take a strategic look at sovereign capabilities rather than a sort of chasing the ball approach. Because I think these are sort of examples where we can only do them in concert across government rather than taking a sort of deeply departmental view. So happy to sort of pick up any of those, but I think they are very much both shared, and also that the government, the Go Science approach is one that this is where we need to show followership as well as leadership. So we need to take responsibility for our particular area and contribute across all of these to look at the pull through. So, for example, quantum for health.
MOD.
Okay, I'll speak to this one. I think I believe we are a science superpower at the moment, but there are some threats to that. I think university finances and university funding models are one threat to that. That is outside our remit within MOD to sort out. That is a very much a cross-government issue. And I will really re-emphasise actually all these skills things are completely cross-government. We also have, I think, issues in terms of we're very good at ideas, but not as good on pull-through in terms of getting into industry. We're getting better. There are specific funding streams on that, but that's something I would definitely concentrate on. We have some specific things in terms of skills within MOD that are a challenge in terms of using the university sector to deliver that, and part of that is security and nationality. So if we want to be able to skill up people, we need them to be UK nationals rather than skilling up the world. I'll give you an example. We looked at radar skills a few years back and found that the majority of master's students in this country being trained in radar were Chinese. Now, you can draw your own conclusions from that and think about some of the issues that we might have down the line about that. But we're absolutely queued into the skilled agenda. MOD funds about 130 PhD students every year in our critical areas. I think coming back to the SDR, Emily, I think you mentioned that. I think one of the things we are expecting as a strong output from SDR is working more closely with universities and UKRI. Music to our ears, we're happy to do that, we want to do it, and it's a great opportunity to have that extra impetus as well. Sovereign capabilities, yes, I think I've already touched on some of them. They keep me awake at night. They're incredibly important, and getting the skills for those is also incredibly important. Nuclear is somewhere we're about to have a push on our skills training in this country. We're also talking about chem bio and how to skill people up in there, and I could give you some other examples. I also really welcome Lucy's comment about international collaborations. I think that something's very important is for us to look at NATO and which parts we should deliver compared to our NATO partners. Of course, there's lots of discussion around that right now. And AUKUS as well is an exciting, relatively new opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that the sovereign capability issue, I think, will be addressed and is being addressed, but I think it's really important that we keep a clarity over what distinguishes us from other countries and what makes us unique in our science and engineering endeavour. And I think what it should be is a real focus not so much on technology but also on ethics and what we believe in the value of the application of technology and who we are. I think that issues of fairness, transparency and equity permeate almost everything that we do with technology. And I think if we get that right, then we have a message that we can transfer into schools that will encourage the next generation that science and engineering will have a meaningful impact on people's lives. I'm a machine learning specialist working in safety critical systems, and if we don't do that, then we run the risk of devaluing everything the country has achieved to this point. I think whether you talk about machine learning or autonomous vehicles or healthcare equity or regional and devolved status, these are the values that I think define us. And I think people ask me what is the measure of my success. Well, at present, the public attitudes of science says that 70% of the public approve of our R&D spend. I've taken over responsibility or sponsorship of that survey, and I hope if you invite me back in 6 months, it will be a larger figure, proofs of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'll speak for the whole committee in saying that I found your answers very illuminating, and I have a much better understanding of the important role that Chief Scientific Advisors play, and I'm very heartened to hear of the way in which you work together and the values that you're representing. We haven't been able to talk very much about the diversity in terms of either of gender, race or disability, etc., of your respective departments and their science staff, but I think we will be writing to you. I'm sure you share our ambition that science should represent the people of this country, those respects. But we've really enjoyed having you speak to us, and I feel that you are not dissidents. I think you are wearing a hat of being outside and inside your department at the same time, which I think is very important. And I also thank you, Professor Johnson, for bringing up DeepSeek. I do not believe that the Treasury should take the model of being able to develop technology for 100th or 1,000th of existing technology in terms of the spending review that's coming up. I hope that the Treasury will be listening and reflecting your concerns that you've set out. So thank you very much. Order. Order. And welcome Dame Angela to this public session of the Select Committee on Science, Innovation and Technology. And we've just heard from departmental chief scientific advisors for the 3 biggest science spending departments in the government, and it's we're very pleased to welcome you as the government's chief scientific advisor to the committee. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us. And you were appointed, Dame Angela, in 2023, and there has been a lot of changes since then, not least an election, and changes in the machinery of government. Now, you have said that you were more interested in delivery than in the sort of shifting and changing strategies and priorities. I have looked at the I've looked at the organizational org chart for scientific advice across government? Well, I looked at the old chart, and then I had to flee to the simplified version that was delivered for this committee a couple of years ago. And even the simplified version is incredibly. It's very hard for me as something of an outsider. I'm just going to just, if you can see from a distance, this is the one I'm talking about. It's very hard for me as an outsider to understand how scientific advice can be coordinated across the government. It must be challenging for you. Perhaps you can set out to us to keep a grip, if you like, on scientific advice, all the new strategies, whilst focusing on delivery. So could you just talk a little bit about how you manage to focus on delivery in a shifting scene with the complexity of the scientific advice that, as we've heard from the chief scientific advisors, and as we see from the organisational information that we have?
Well, thank you very much for that. That's a great opening question. It doesn't feel complicated where I sit, and I hope you can see that I have good reason to have great confidence in my network of departmental CSAs. They don't actually directly report to me. Quite correctly, each one of them reports to their own permanent secretary or elsewhere into line management in their department. But they all have a dotted line to me. I sit on the appointments panels for them, and I meet with them regularly, both as a group. I meet with them every week as a group, and frequently individually. So I do actually view them as mine. My job is to make sure that excellent science advice is at the heart of all decision-making in government. And of course, most of that is delivered through the departmental CSAs. But as you heard from them, sometimes there are things that arise that are really better handled at a level that is across department. And that's the sort of first rule, I would say, for Go Science, is when should we get involved? And it's when things are pertinent, deeply pertinent to more than one department at a time, that's when we think, okay, Go Science is needed here, let's get in there and help them be coordinated. But as I say, I hope you could see from the way they interact together, even though Chris has only been here for a few months, that it is very much a team. So, yes, complicated requirement, team response.
Right. And how does the new government and the changing strategies affect your delivery of your priorities?
Yeah. The mission-focused government is an absolute gift to us, actually. We were already, before the change of government in July, we were already working together across the CSA network to map how R&D in different bits of government fitted together. We'd had to sort of make up our own categories. So when a new government arrived and said, right, here are the 5 missions, and also I can't remember the word, the underpinning one of the few underpinning ones, including defence and security, thank you, that was just like, okay, great, we'll work with that. We straight away wrote from Go Science to the SROs of the 5 mission boards saying we want you to have 1 or 2 CSAs, senior responsible officers, or owners, probably owners, officers. I'm displaying my MOD background. So personally, basically the senior civil servant in charge of each of the missions, I wrote to them saying, I want you to have 1 or sometimes 2 CSAs on your mission board. Right. Because as soon as we've got this cross-cutting set of tasks across government, my departmental set of CSAs need to get embedded. And that's how we would solve what I would view as a sort of a many-to-many issue. So each of those missions needs to be talking to many departments. Well, I've already got a team of CSAs. I can just put 1 CSA, or sometimes 2, in each mission to reach out to the others that they know. And then I think there was some mention in that session you've just had about how we've been using missions as a source of focus for R&D in the SR. I must admit, for me, this is one of my favourite bits of my job, is we hold mission boards. We're on the sort of 3rd round of those now for each department's SR bid. So SR bids, spending review bids will still go in from departments, but we want to make sure that they are well aligned, properly prioritised and evidenced across departments, and we've been using missions basically as a focus to do that. Missions and defence and security, and actually we have a separate one on adaptation as well. So we have actually done, I would say we've done quite a big pivot towards using missions as an organising principle for cross-government R&D.
Right. So does that mean that you will consider the achievement of those missions as part of your sort of key performance indicators in terms of this committee holding the science advisors to account?
Yes, I think at this stage the question to ask of missions is, have you focused on what are the R&D requirements for this mission?
Right.
What we need is for mission boards to say, in order to deliver our mission, what R&D do we need, what's already been done, and what gaps are there that still need to be filled.
Just a quick question before I hand over to Adam. So we heard from the health CSA that their R&D budget was 2 billion out of 200 billion, so that is 1%. Do you have views on the, as we know, the government's overall science spend is over 20 billion, which was protected in the budget. Do you have a view, yes or no, of whether the country is spending enough on science?
Well, no, because, I mean, that's like asking a farmer if the weather's good enough.
You're saying you can't answer the question.
So I think any GCSA would argue for strong spending on R&D. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't do that.
Right.
And at the same time, I recognise that we are in a constrained fiscal situation.
Thank you. Thank you. Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Dame Angela. Thank you for joining us today. So, shortly after your appointment, I think about 2 years ago, you were talking about meeting the leaders of the 10 strands of science and technology framework, and you made a statement about understanding the blockers to delivery. I was wondering, in the couple of years that you've been in post now, what have you learned about the blockers in government?
I do think this issue of working extremely well within departments and it being more difficult across departments, I think that is a blocker. It's one of the things that's, I think, so I was an academic before I came to work in the MOD in 2019. And, you know, there are all these jokes about how academics spend their whole life flying around the world talking to the same people but in different places. There's a wonderful set of novels about it. What that is about making sure that everybody is up to speed with whatever's going fastest. So it's basically about careful and respectful copying so that you learn from the person who's making the fastest advances. I think I see less of that here in the civil service. What I see in the civil service is an incredibly strong culture of collaboration that happens in a different way. Great civil servants do it with cups of coffee and telephone calls. They spend a lot of time checking in with each other. But I don't see a strong a conference culture. Now, what we do, perhaps that's not the right way to do it, but I think we could spend more time networking. Hence my and Go Science's big investment in time on keeping our networks strong and together.
Great, thank you. That's fascinating, actually. So, I mean, it sounds like you've had some good progress in dealing with that sort of blocking thing that you identified a couple of years ago. But I guess, what extent are you working on improving that collaborative nature? And is there anything that you think we as a committee should be examining in terms of dealing with the blockers, as it were?
Yes. Well, I think, it's not my thing, but missions are per se cross-government missions. I mean, they are an attempt to get across government in order to solve the real problems. I think if you would ask the missions what they're doing for R&D, that would be fantastic.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Dame Angela. That's a wonderful call to action for us.
We will. Alison,
Thank you. I want to move on to science, technology for resilience and dealing with the risks that we face as a country. And you've talked about building foresight capacity across government and having the right data, the right science and the right experts. Which of those areas needs the most work?
Right data. What did I say? The right data.
So you said right data, right science and right experts.
Right, okay, fine.
So of those three?
Of those three, gosh, I would say data is the fundamental substrate. Right. I know everybody always says that, but I think especially the right data. I think when people took, there's this old saying now about data being the new oil. And over the years, we got really good at using all of oil, didn't we? We ended up really not hardly throwing any of it away. Even the sort of really cruddy black stuff, we figured out how to turn it into roads. And I don't think that's true at the moment with data. So I think having the right data is a big issue. Actually, I think it's a real strength for us as a country. I think having the right data requires you, first of all, to be clear about what your question is. So what's my policy question? What science questions arise from that policy question? And what data and what analysis, which would include some modelling, am I going to have to use to answer the policy question I need to get at, sometimes very quickly, from the data I've got? If you haven't got the data, there's no workaround.
On that similarly, obviously there was many concerns about the way in which oil has been extracted from both countries and from people, and the development consequences of that. So, is there a concern about the extraction of data as the oil of today?
I think that's a super question. Yeah, whose data? Extracted. I think we need to take our citizens with us on the move to the way the future will be as data is gathered in many ways about all of us. And I think citizens have every right and should ask questions about who is using my data about me and what are they doing with it. And I think that's I think our responsibility is first and foremost to our own citizens, and I think we should also ask those questions about all citizens of the world.
I think that links to the follow-on questions. I'm glad you mentioned data. So I want to just quickly touch on the National Data Library, whether that will give us the right data. I was going to ask about the assurance to citizens, but also looking at where we might be missing key data to deal with certain issues. How involved have you been in the development of those proposals for the National Data Library?
That's more been assisted by my trusted colleague, Dave Smith, the National Technology Advisor. So he's seized the National Data Library. I think it'd be a great idea to have a conversation with him about it. I have pretty strong opinions about data. I mean, my working academic life was as a mathematical modeller. We can do nothing without good data. Actually, I think you would know about that too from your previous professional life. I'm very strong on the. I think we should think about our history as fantastic gatherers and curators of data. And I think about, to me, that I would give two examples of that. One is the Ordnance Survey. I mean, a map is a fantastic way to visualise deep and complicated data about place. And another would be the Met Office. And one of the things that I sometimes say, actually more often in this building than elsewhere, is I'm not sure everybody realises that not every country has a Met Office like ours. I mean, we're actually very lucky in that we have two amazing sets of weather forecasters and climate understanders. Again, absolutely fundamental gathering, curation, and then analysis of data that has gone on to provide this absolutely vital service about what will the weather be like tomorrow, and now about what will the climate be like as it changes in the future.
That links quite nicely to addressing risk and developing our resilience and understanding our risk strategies. So what external experts do you have to create a system to feed up the risks within departments and how has this made progress, but also what mechanisms are in place to ensure scientific advice around risk and preparedness feeds into policy making and budgets.
Very good. So as I expect you know, the National Risk Register now updates itself on a rolling basis. So it used to be something that sort of got written and not looked at continuously. It's now continuously updated, and we have just recently put into place a set of expert advisors for that process. So those they're actually in the expert science advisors for that process. That's a Cabinet Office exercise that's been done with help from us in Go Science. So that's about this ask really that comes from Module 1 of the COVID inquiry, which says, well, hold on a minute, you need science advice day in, day out, not just on the day that the disaster crystallises. Yeah. So that's come into being. I met with the chairs of those groups of experts, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, and they were in Cabinet's office actually doing a sort of similar job to what CSAs do, so specifically as expert, scientific, critical friends for the risks in the National Risk Register. So I think that's the biggest, the big new thing. I think the big new thing is that the risks are continuously updated, and the second thing is the arrival of this expert advice.
Just a quick addition on that one. We partner with the private sector quite a lot, and a lot of our risk is with the private sector that they're not as prepared as they would be. So what's the relationship within government and with the private sector that we partner with to make sure that they have that infrastructure to be resilient?
Great question. And I'm struggling with that one. What do we do with the private sector?
You can write to us.
Okay, I can write to you. I mean, thinking back to COVID days, we worked closely with the private sector. They were fantastic providers of data for us. We were desperate to know about human mobility, and that data we got from the private sector. In terms of companies' own resilience, I think they would get more of that. I think I should write to you.
Thank you very much, Darren. We have to move on, but I know that Lauren and Emily have quick interventions now. So, Emily.
So I just wanted, picking up all those strands and sort of bringing them together into that original question about building foresight. We have several different foresight activities within different government departments. How much do you think that those get brought together and there is an understanding at cabinet level of these horizon scanning insights?
That's a very good question. So we have a foresight unit within Go Science, and they're very active in running networks of people who work on foresight right across government, including, actually I gave one of my prizes to that unit at our Go Science Away Day last year, because they've done a fantastic job of taking what used to be their face-to-face training and turning it into an online service so that it could just be much more efficiently delivered right across government. I've got in here, I could dig for it if you'd like, the number of people who've been through that training. But I think the point I'd really like to get to is that we are very mindful that lots of bits of government are very interested in these skills, and we've had so many that we've had to change the way we deliver them. They're well networked via Go Science. Go Science runs that network. Do I think cabinet ministers are aware? I think cabinet ministers will be aware that they have foresight units within their departments. Yes, certainly from the departments. The department I know, the single department that I know best is the MOD, and for sure, MOD ministers would know about the foresight units inside MOD.
Great, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Very quick one is about, you touched on about data and the explosion of data and right data. It's often been said that we measure what we value and we value what we measure. So there are pockets that are missing, the missing data, and sometimes the human experience cannot be captured through numbers to really, how do we reach through that and beyond that to identify those bits that we really need to change to make things better?
talk to people. So I think we have. I don't think data replaces the need to listen to what people need, and I think I very specifically say talk and listen. I shouldn't have said talk to people. I should have said listen to people. Actually, I think. In terms, so that's a really important part of missing data. So things that are not captured, despite so much being captured about our everyday lives. I think there are other. The reason I emphasise so much starting with the question you're interested in is precisely for that. I think if you just sort of gather data willy-nilly, you end up with the data you've got. It's much more important to start with, well, what question did I want to address? Therefore, what do I need to know? And that's the point at which it becomes clear, oh, I don't have that bit of data. We used to call them the sort of the ingredients lists. Imagine that, the model is some kind of a recipe, but every recipe comes with an ingredients list of the things you need to know. And I think those ingredients lists are very important. Can I riff on this a little bit? I think it should be a national data larder, not a national data library.
National data?
Larder.
Larder.
Because you take many different things from a larder to put them together into a recipe, don't you? It's quite unusual that you would just take one packet out of your larder and make something useful out of it. And also, a larder requires a lot of looking after.
Yeah.
If you don't look after a larder, all sorts of terrible things happen. But I don't think I'm really going to win on that one. I'm happy to call it
I think it sounds like you have the committee's support in that, so we will see. We will see. Now I'm going to ask Martin to take us on to R&D spend, I think.
Yes, but I'm still thinking about the larder versus the library.
Well, it's nearly lunchtime.
That's obviously why. Yes.
There you are then.
Clearly, I mean, your library is Dewey Decimal. You are categorised, you are put in a pigeonhole, you are put in a shelf, you are siloed. A larder, you are not. Interesting. Thank you for that, sorry. Coming back to
R&D spend.
R&D spend, which interesting, same sort of concepts, I suspect. So we've been sort of looking at trying to understand R&D spend across the whole government. Do you think we have collectively sufficient data on our R&D spending in general?
It's quite a civil service answer. We've got much better data than we used to have. So one of the things that DCIT did in its sort of first year was create a list of who was spending what. And interestingly, when I saw that list as Government Chief Scientific Advisor, it had more detail in it than I'd ever seen as CSA and the MOD about defence. It is better. Forgive me for being a cracked record. It's not in a great state across departments. And gathering it up into a way that we can share it across departments, which clearly we must do, is a lot of work. And I think this is probably quite a long project to get it right. And I think, therefore, we should think about, well, what is it? Why do we want this data in order to decide in what order are we going to ask departments to do the work to get this data into the state we need it to be in. So, for example, I think a bad question is to ask departments how much you're spending on AI. Sometimes it's useful to substitute the word statistics for AI. You have to be very careful when you do it. But we'd never ask that question. You think, oh, that's a daft question, because there's going to be that sort of analysis woven through everything everybody does. But I think I think one of the questions we would love to know is, where is our R&D money being spent? But then you ask, well, what do you mean by where? Actually, I think we want to know, where is the person whose job is supported by this R&D actually working? And so you have to be very careful not to just get the invoice address, that sort of thing. So the short answer is it's better than it was. There's still many ways in which it could be better. And I think there's an important prioritisation question about what questions we want to answer next. So currently, basically what we have is, by departments, by years, and with some subdivisions within departments, but not very fine-grained.
Interesting, thank you. It's nice to know nothing changes. I spent many years building data warehouses out of relational database systems and trying to combine things to ask sensible questions. And it is very much what is the question that you want to know, which is where you started. And that in itself, you've talked about your foresight units, which is fine. But I'm interested in your role. The question I always like to ask people is, what does success look like? That is the classic one, because that determines where you're at. But apart from foresight, so I live in a town called Dawlish. You may know Dawlish from the railway line. You may also know Dawlish for its black swans. I'm interested in black swan incidents. That's kind of interesting, where you, in your role, how are you prepared for those? So in terms of what does success look like, what does success look like for what you can currently predict, which is relatively straightforward and relatively in the box. And how are you taking real innovation, black swan moments coming in from move fast and break things, real disruptors coming on board, a Chinese AI system suddenly coming out of nowhere?
Very good. We use horizon scanning of various kinds to watch out for particularly emerging technologies, and also emerging risks. So there are quite well-established horizon scanning mechanisms. They tend to be sort of by risk, that will give us warnings of bad things that seem to be going on in other parts of the world. If there are bad things going on here, we would know about them. So plenty of horizon scanning for technologies, for risks, and for ideas. So, I mean, remember, one of the things that we have, you met some of the CSAs, all of them will have a mechanism to reach out into their own, what I would call their sort of proper generating communities, which will be mostly academic communities. So, for example, Tamsin and Nick talked about DSEC, the Defence Science Expert Committee, which is a set of scientists who are cleared to know really quite a lot about defence and just bring in from all over the place what's going on in your field. I sat on committees like that where there was always, at each meeting, there was a tour de table, and each member of the committee was asked to tell the others, and particularly the department, about a weird and interesting thing they had seen recently. And that's one of our sort of own in-house mechanisms, and we also use wider ones that are available. And then the other thing we can do is be well prepared generically. So to know how we will, first of all, talk to each other if something bad happens. And the ones that make us very nervous are the ones that knock out communications. I do actually have, I have copies of our, what we call our golden hour documents. I live both in London and in Oxford. I have printed out copies of those in both homes on
low tech
to guard against the day that actually the comms has gone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
May I?
Okay, we're running out of
brief
time.
Answers. I promise brief answers.
Very quickly, Martin.
Okay. I'm interested in how you stop projects.
Yes.
Stop themes. I'm also interested in the effectiveness of R&D tax credits.
Yes.
Great. Two great questions.
Okay, fine. Effectiveness of R&D tax credits I'm going to write to you because I think you probably need numbers for that and I don't have them to hand. How do we stop things? We look at have they had the impact that they wanted. And if they're not, they stop or they go on notice that they're going to stop.
Look at that, it's sort of regular project reviews or something.
Yes, we have it.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin. I'm just going to briefly ask you about growth. Going for growth. You mentioned it yourself, the missions, the importance of growth, the importance to our country, the importance to this government. So two related questions. There's a lot of emphasis on innovation driving growth. We have an inquiry on innovation growth and the regions. What is the evidence of what is the link between innovation and economic growth? And is there a robust evidence base for it?
Mm-hmm. So actually, as part of our work on technology adoption, we have been told by academics that it's not that robust, that link.
Right, that's what I found it very difficult to find an evidence base for that.
No, I think what you can see is at country levels, you can see that countries that that invest well in R&D get good growth, but it's very hard to untie where that link is. So what you can get case studies. You can say here's some money that went into this particular innovation or R&D project, and here is growth GVA that I can attribute to that. Yes. That's about as far as it goes. And I think it's for the following reason, that it's not usually a straight pipeline that goes from I invented a thing, I developed the thing, I got my way across the valley of death, and then I drove improvements in productivity this way. And I think, certainly you would see it in MOD, that things that got invented 20 years ago, sometimes they were so clever that nobody knew what to do with them. And then they sat on the shelf for a while. Unfortunately, had very sort of quite well-labelled shelves. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly you see what it's for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's it. There's a history of that to innovation science. I do think it's important to build up that evidence base. I hope you would agree with that.
Completely agree.
Excellent. And just on the Treasury, obviously driving growth, and the Treasury does not have a chief scientific officer, chief scientific advisor at the moment, rather a director general. Do you think it's important that they do have a chief scientific advisor?
So I would call I would say they do have a CSA. So the DG for Growth acts as the CSA in the Treasury, and she's more of an advisor in some ways for the rest of the CSAs. So it's the CSA in Treasury who helps all the other CSAs understand how to interact with Treasury.
Well, rather than providing scientific advice to Treasury.
Right, so
that's very interesting.
I think it's an important role, and we wouldn't be without it.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got two, I think we're going to hear from John and Steve. So John first.
Thank you, Chair. Dame Angela, you've been asked to lead on the review of technology adoption for growth, innovation and productivity. I appreciate it's still very early days, but what can you tell us so far? For example, the previous innovation review looked at regulation. What are the barriers will this review be looking at, and will it be considering the sort of tensions between the risks and rewards of technology adoption?
Thank you. You're right, it is absolutely in flight, that study. What I can tell you about it is we're very clear about what it's going to address. So it addresses the 8 growth sectors of the industrial strategy. Won't bore you by reading those out, but there's things like defence and advanced manufacturing, plus 6 others. It is absolutely focused on UK companies, so it's not about public sector, and it's about technology you could have today. So it's not about emerging technologies. So we've been very clear about the boundaries of what we're going to work on. So the public consultation is still open. I mentioned a roundtable with academics who work on precisely this question, who, as so often, are fantastically generous with their time and expertise, as are the sectors. So first of all, I should tell you, I'm doing this with Dave Smith, the National Technology Advisor, and Dave has led on most of the sector roundtables. So he's been going around the country holding sector roundtables to hear directly from people working in the sectors what are the barriers to adoption. I think what we're hearing is that delivery is probably going to need to be sector specific. I hope I might have to come back and say, we changed our mind. But I think that's coming out pretty loud and clear. And of course, not surprisingly, costs and skills are barriers for any business looking to choose where to invest.
Great, thank you. I just want to move on slightly to a related topic, but I think, which is shortly before the budget, you wrote to the Chancellor about scale-up finance. Could you explain the background to that letter and the research behind it?
Yeah. Yes. So one of the great things that Go Science does, and it was all set up before I got here, so I can shout about how great it is a really good set of data analyses about our comparative advantage in different technologies. So it looks at 52 technologies, all countries in the world, scored by a large number of metrics, but those metrics boiled down into sort of 4 dimensions. And what you see in that data pretty much over and over again is we're really good at research. You know, we publish fantastic papers that are highly cited and have a lot of impact. Actually, we're not bad at patents, and we're really quite good these days at spin-out. And what we're bad at is growth. So what we're bad at is the £100 million ask. And that's the point at which our wonderful spin-outs from all sorts of, not just from universities, from all sorts of places, go abroad. That letter was, I would say, largely about putting a finger in that hole in the dike, basically.
Right.
So that's the problem it was set to solve.
Could I ask a follow-up on that?
Yes, I think it's very important.
You mentioned the Met Office already, which is based in Exeter, and we've got the University of Exeter, and they work very closely together. We've got a great sort of spin-out culture developing because of that. But your letter didn't reference regional scale-up funding and financing. The Southwest, according to the BBCA, the Southwest in totality, including Bristol all the way down, gets about 2.7% of all private equity and venture capital funding per year, which is minuscule. You know, London and the Southwest obviously suck up about 60-65% of all of that. So do you view sort of the regional sort of aspects of this as particularly interesting or important at all, or do you think it's a national challenge?
I've heard that same issue referenced by the group of 9 northern universities. And not really jokingly, I suggest they buy a helicopter.
Well, they're quicker.
Yeah, because so one of my CSAs, not here today, worked in venture capital before he became a CSA, and he is splendidly direct about the world of venture capital. He says they don't really like going very far. We can't move the Southwest closer to London, but perhaps I think we should do. Actually, I think we should do something about it. I was very taken with your thing about showcasing technologies. That's another thing we can bring some things to London. But largely, it seemed to me that what we need to do is find a way to make it easier to get investors out to the regions. Because we're not that big a country, let's face it.
No. So it's only 2 hours away. So
Newcastle's only 2 hours, 50 minutes away. And just to follow, this is a very good point. You know, there was also, I think it's 2.2% of venture capital goes to female-founded companies. I don't think you're going to suggest that they buy helicopters. So there's clearly structural issues with how venture capital is distributed, yes. And it's part. I imagine that's something that you are looking at.
Yes, it wasn't in our letter, and you're right. It ought to be addressed on the basis that there's probably a ton of opportunity getting missed there. We don't at the moment have specific schemes to address that, but I hear you.
Great, sorry.
Thank you. And just a final point on that scale of financing. I think I'm right to say that you're more likely to get foreign direct investment through venture capital and private equity into the regions than you are UK based, yes. Which is really interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
From America and elsewhere, they're more interested in the regions.
Indeed.
I just want to touch on public trust. You've touched on it already about bringing people with us. I think it's incredibly important that we bring people along with us in terms of both scientific sort of advances, but in terms of support for spending, which remains high at the moment, which is good. But in terms of actual deployment of technology like vaccines and then getting people into science as well through the sorts of skills pipeline. Could you tell us what you think the biggest challenge is for science around that public trust, bringing people along with us?
I think it has to be misinformation and disinformation, which is clearly a large and really a growing problem. I'm sort of making myself hostage to fortune because I don't know the answer. But I think it's a big and important question. I used to think that getting sensible, evidenced answers out into the mainstream press where it would be referenced by social media was enough, and I don't anymore. But that's nearly as far as I've got. The other thing I completely recognise is that I particularly really don't know about social media, and actually I think many of us high up in various bits of government are not native-born users of social media. And I do wonder if this is a place where actually we really ought to sit down with some younger people and listen to them. I'm not a great fan of youth councils that are sort of done in a performative way, but when there's a whole section of society that knows a ton more about something that is proving to be a problem than we do, I do start to think, oh, actually, we better ask some people who use this stuff all the time. That's as far as I've got.
You should try and go on TikTok, except I think we're probably not allowed on TikTok. Which
I'm allowed on TikTok on my own phone.
On your own phone, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Thank you. And then just final question from me. You lead a masterclass for ministers, I believe. And what's the most important lesson that you think politicians, ministers, and then such as ourselves can learn about science and from your perspective?
A good scientist will always try again to explain if he didn't understand the first time. And there is no shame in saying, I didn't understand that, could you please say it again? I think that's really important because there's a fair bit goes on all over the world of people saying things they've heard elsewhere. I think perhaps particularly in technology at the moment because it's rather fashionable. People who are just repeating something they've heard can't explain it to you in different words if you didn't understand them. So I think it serves two purposes. One, you might have a better chance yourself of understanding it, but it's also quite a good way, I think, of finding out, well, just how expert is this person?
Yeah. I think we've got to normalise asking people what do they say. What do you mean by that? Because science can be a cover for snake oil, basically, and and that's part of the job of this committee, I think. And I would also just say on your misinformation, and this, that's part of the inquiry that we're also looking at algorithms and social media in the wake of the riots, understanding how misinformation and misinformation particularly is spread. And whilst I understand your sort of youth councils, I hear what you say about not being in favour of them, I do think we need to find ways of getting the insight of this younger generation. And our under the microscope inquiry, another inquiry of ours, which is asking young people asking people in general, including young people, what they think we should be looking at. I'm sure that social media will come up there, and I think we really do need to hear what young people are saying about these important issues. So maybe not a youth council, but evidence session or some kind of engagement. But Emily, I think you wanted a quick.
It's just a final question, and only it's for balance. We asked the previous panel. You are the government chief scientific advisor. When is the last time you saw the Prime Minister or members of the Cabinet? And do you feel that if you request to meet him, you would get that meeting?
So the last time I saw the Prime Minister was in the middle of December. I'm seeing the Chancellor a week today. They're not Cabinet Ministers, but I've seen more junior ministers in the Cabinet Office yesterday, Desnes last week. I see Minister Valance pretty much fortnightly. Yes, I do.
I think that's really important question, Emily, and it's important. It's important. As well as the changes of government bringing the digital centre for government into DCIT, Everything that we've heard this morning emphasises the importance of scientific advice being understood and respected and acted upon within each department across government. So having the political will to drive that, the political support to your position to drive that through is very important. So that's a great note on which to end. Thank you so much for your evidence here. You've been an excellent witness. We really appreciated your sharing your experience and your views with us, and we hope this is the beginning of a very constructive working relationship.
Fantastic.
Order.